Hey Days of Our Lives fans. Salem is heading straight into disaster because Gwen is missing and suddenly everybody is scrambling. And honestly, whenever half the town starts searching at once, you just know there's a diabolical loose end sitting right in plain sight. So the real question is whether Gwen's disappearance is exactly what it looks like, or whether somebody is playing Salem for fools again. It's Radhika from Radhika's Storyline, and we're going to talk about Days of Our Lives. But first, please hit subscribe if you're not already following us. So let's talk about this week in Salem because there is a lot going on, and I mean a lot. The big headline, obviously, is Gwen's disappearance, and the second that little detail dropped, the whole vibe of the week shifted into panic mode. Leo is desperate to find Gwen, and honestly, that makes sense, because for all of Leo's drama and chaos and occasional total nonsense, when he locks onto something, he goes all in. And this time he's not just fretting or gossiping or spiraling in couture. He is actively searching, which tells me this is not some cute misunderstanding or romantic fake-out. This feels serious. Maybe not 6 feet under serious, because this is Salem and people come back from the dead like it's a hobby, but still serious. And then Rafe gets pulled into Gwen's disappearance, which I liked, because if there's one thing Salem does well, it's yanking the local authorities into a personal mess that somehow becomes everybody's business by lunch. So now we've got Leo searching, Rafe involved, and then later in the week Chad is apparently filling Rafe in on the latest about Gwen, which means whatever is happening is spreading fast. That is never a good sign. When information starts bouncing from Leo to Rafe to Chad to who knows who else, it usually means the truth is messy, incomplete, and probably a little tone-deaf on somebody's part. Now, Monday sounds especially chaotic. Philip is working hard to prove his innocence to Gabby, which already sounds exhausting, because trying to prove anything to Gabby when she's angry is like trying to put out a house fire with a water gun. She is not exactly patient, and she is definitely not gullible. And since Gabby currently believes Philip and Xander are at the core of her Gabby chic knockoff drama, Philip is in a bad spot. Honestly, these two are always electric together, but not in a warm, stable, healthy way. More like sparks fly and somebody ends up shouting way. Which, let's be real, is why they're fun. And over in Alex's land, he gets shocked by Joy's latest demand. Then later in the week he promises Stephanie he won't agree to Joy's new terms, and by Thursday Joy is reaching out to Belle for legal advice. So right there you can see this isn't some tiny lover's spat or one awkward misunderstanding. Joy is playing hardball. She has leverage, or at least she thinks she does, and Alex is clearly rattled enough that he has to reassure Stephanie. Honestly, whenever somebody in Salem starts making promises like, I won't agree, I immediately assume they either already considered it, are about to cave, or are about to get backed into a corner. It's basically a soap law at this point. And Monday also gives us Gus having a run-in with Leo, which feels like one of those scenes that could be comic, tense, or both at the same time. With Leo searching for Gwen and Gus intersecting with him early in the week, I'm automatically suspicious. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just awkward timing. But in Salem, awkward timing is usually just a polite way of saying plot device. And Marlena has a stern warning for Kat, which I have to say already sounds juicy, because Marlena does not waste her stern voice on nonsense. If she is warning Kat, then either Kat is about to make a terrible decision, or she already has and the fallout is just warming up. Now, Tuesday moves some pieces around in a very interesting way. Brady and Sarah listen to Xander's new theory, and that caught my attention immediately. Not because Xander is always right because heck, he's Xander, but because when other people stop and actually listen to one of his theories, it usually means the theory has enough weight to be dangerous. And if this theory is connected in any way to Gwen or the wider mess around Gabby Chic and all these shifting loyalties, then Xander may be closer to the truth than anyone wants to admit. That would be very on brand, honestly, because Salem loves ignoring people right up until the second they're proven right. And then Holly and Tate reconcile, which, okay, good for them. That's a softer beat in a week full of kidnappings, legal threats, family warnings, and emotional disasters. I mean, every once in a while Salem has to let somebody hug it out before the next shocker drops. Kate apologizes to Roman, which feels important too, because Kate does not exactly hand out apologies like party favors. So if she's apologizing, then either she really means it or she has decided it's strategically useful, and with Kate it can honestly be both. And Marlena tries to convince EJ to listen to his conscience, and that line alone tells you everything about where EJ's head is right now. If Marlena is trying to guide EJ toward his conscience, that means his current instincts are headed in the completely opposite direction, which is terrible and also not surprising. EJ is one of those people who always looks like he's one bad conversation away from becoming his worst self. And then Susan starts fearing that EJ is becoming just like his father, which is not a subtle comparison. That is a full-on alarm bell. Nobody wants to hear they are channeling Stefano, unless their entire life goal is a family-themed reign of terror. So then by Wednesday, Johnny is working overtime to lift Chanel's spirits, which I thought was sweet. And honestly, it's nice to see somebody doing emotional labor that isn't attached to a secret, a scheme, or a potential custody battle. But of course the week can't stay sweet for long. Leo turns to Rafe for help, which deepens this Gwen story even more, and Susan starts sensing that EJ is becoming like Stefano. That is the kind of maternal dread that can either save a person or send them unglued, and with EJ, I'm not sure which way it goes. Abe and Theo also bust Lexie in a lie, which is huge because once the lie is exposed, the escape plan starts feeling doomed. And let's talk about that for a second, because Kristen and Lexie putting their escape plan in motion is one of the biggest, what could possibly go wrong setups of the week. It is Salem. Escape plans do not go smoothly there. They just don't. They are practically designed to collapse in the most dramatic way possible, with one person panicking, another person overestimating their own brilliance, and a third person walking in at the worst possible moment. So when Abe and Theo bust Lexie in a lie, I'm immediately thinking this whole thing is starting to crack earlier than Kristen probably expected. Which, honestly, I love, because Kristen operating from a place of control is scary, but Kristen operating while the walls start closing in is much more entertaining. Now, Thursday looks like one of those deceptive episodes where some happy thing happens and then 3 disasters unfold right behind it. Rachel's release from Bayview leads to a family celebration, which on paper sounds wonderful. And yet, because this is Salem, family celebration usually translates to every unresolved issue will be sitting at the table wearing a smile. So yes, it's a celebration, but I'm not exactly expecting balloons and uncomplicated joy. Especially when Kristen is involved in a major plotline at the same time. That woman can turn a toast into a hostage situation emotionally, and I mean that with affection and fear. And Alex promises Stephanie he won't agree to Joy's new terms, which I mentioned earlier, but it really matters because it suggests Stephanie now knows enough to be worried. Then Gabby shocks Philip, and I need to pause there because those two are already volatile enough without random shocks getting tossed into the mix. If Gabby has been suspecting Philip and Xander in her knockoff mess, then whatever she does next could be either a calculated move or a total emotional reaction. With Gabby, it's usually both. She can be furious and strategic at the exact same time, which is why people underestimate her at their own risk. And then there's Joy going to Belle for legal advice. That is not flirting. That is not bluffing. That is escalation. So whatever bombshell Joy is dropping on Alex, she is serious about protecting herself or pressing her advantage. Honestly, I love when somebody in Salem stops talking and starts lawyering up because it instantly raises the stakes. It says, no, this is not going away by Friday after one heartfelt speech and a dramatic hallway kiss. Then Friday brings more movement. Abe and Theo surprise Lexie, which tells me they are not done exposing whatever game she's playing. Leo is desperate to get to Alemania, and that is such an oddly specific and dramatic detail that I immediately sat up. Desperate to get there?
Why?
What changed? What clue points him in that direction? Because now the Gwen story expands beyond Salem, which usually means we're either dealing with a cover-up, a family connection, or some twisted setup that has international soap energy all over it. Chad also fills Rafe in on the latest about Gwen, which keeps the pressure on. And Gus and Javi talk about their future together, which sounds like a quieter, emotional beat amid the madness. And then EJ and Kristen actually have a moment of real honesty, which, wow, that alone feels dangerous. Honest demeras are sometimes more terrifying than lying ones. So that's the recap, and honestly, it's one of those weeks where every storyline feels like it's standing on a trapdoor. Nobody's comfortable, nobody's fully telling the truth, and even the people trying to do the right thing are surrounded by chaos. Which is exactly why this week is so much fun. Now let's get into the real question here, because the big mystery hanging over everything is Gwen's disappearance. Who's behind it? What Leo is going to uncover, and how all of that might collide with the other storylines exploding around Salem. So, first up, I have to talk about the most obvious candidate, and that is EJ. I know. The Raw setup almost wants us to think of him immediately, especially with Susan fearing he's becoming like Stefano and Marlena urging him to listen to his conscience. Those are not subtle clues. That is the show practically putting a neon sign over EJ saying, "Look at this man and his increasingly questionable moral compass." And I suspect that is exactly why I'm hesitant to pin Gwen's disappearance on him too quickly. It feels almost too neat. He is the easiest answer, the most convenient suspect, and Salem loves serving up the convenient suspect before yanking the rug out from under us. And yet I can't rule him out. I mean, if EJ is slipping into old DiMera instincts, and if Susan can feel that something is off, then he could absolutely be involved in some shady plan that spun out of control. Maybe he didn't personally grab Gwen and throw her into a castle basement, because honestly that's almost too cartoonish even for him, but I could see him setting something in motion, withholding information, or trying to manipulate a situation that ended with Gwen disappearing. That would fit him perfectly. He loves believing he is the smartest person in the room, and that kind of arrogance is usually where the disaster starts. Next, I have to consider that somebody unexpected is behind Gwen's kidnapping because the setup itself almost nudges us there. Leo heading to Alemania is what really pushes me in that direction. If the trail suddenly points outside Salem, then maybe this is tied to a family, a location, or a history beat that most people in town are not thinking about yet. And honestly, when a soap starts pointing characters toward a place like Alemania, I start assuming old loyalties, hidden enemies, or long-simmering grudges are about to surface. My guess is that whoever is behind this may not be the loudest villain in Salem right now, but someone with a quieter motive, somebody who benefits from everyone assuming EJ did it. And I wonder if that's why Leo's storyline is so compelling this week. Leo is flashy and dramatic, yes, but he's also weirdly useful when a mystery gets personal. He notices odd behavior. He gets under people's skin. He can sniff out hypocrisy better than half the town, mostly because he's fluent in it. So, if he's the one getting desperate enough to head to Alemania, I'm betting he uncovers something very messy and very human, not just a simple villain twirling a mustache in the shadows. Another possibility is that Gwen's disappearance connects indirectly to the Gabby Chic knockoff drama, and I know that sounds like two separate messes, but Salem plots have a way of colliding when you least expect it. Gabby believes Philip and Xander are at the core of her problem. Philip is scrambling to prove innocence. Brady and Sarah are listening to Xander's new theory, and all of that tells me there is a current of suspicion running through the week that may be larger than any one issue. I could see Gwen having learned something, stumbled onto a connection, or been targeted because she became a loose end. Not necessarily because she was the central player, but because she knew enough to be inconvenient. That, to me, is classic soap danger. The person who just knows a little too much suddenly vanishes, and everybody realizes too late that she was holding one crucial piece of the puzzle. And if that's true, then Xander becomes especially interesting. I'm not saying Xander kidnapped Gwen. Let me be clear. But when the spoilers say he just might be Holly's savior and that Brady and Sarah are listening to his theory, that paints him as somebody positioned near the heart of whatever is unfolding. Sometimes the person branded as rough, impulsive, or shady is also the one closest to the truth. I could absolutely see Xander connecting dots that more polished people miss, and I could see him stepping into a hero role almost by accident. Frankly, Salem loves that sort of irony. And here's another one, Gus. Now, I'm not saying Gus is definitely the mastermind, because we do not have that kind of confirmation, and I am not going to pretend we do. But the fact that he has a run-in with Leo early in the week, and then later he's having a future talk with Javi, makes him stand out just enough for me to squint at him. Sometimes soaps position a character in a seemingly casual scene right before that person turns out to matter way more than expected. I wonder if Gus knows something he shouldn't, saw something he hasn't told anyone, or is connected to someone at the center of Gwen's disappearance in a way that has not fully come out yet. And honestly, if Leo is desperate and running into Gus and then trying to get to Alemania, I don't think that sequence is random. It may not mean Gus is guilty, but it could mean that encounter matters. It could be a clue. It could be a trigger. It could be the moment Leo realizes the official version of events is nonsense. And if that happens, then Rafe is going to have to decide whether he follows the evidence or keeps chasing the easiest suspect, which are not always the same thing in Salem. Now, another possibility, and this one is sneaky, is that Gwen's disappearance is part of a broader manipulation rather than a straightforward kidnapping. I could see somebody wanting Gwen out of the way temporarily, not permanently, in order to shake up alliances, force confessions, or trigger exactly the kinds of reactions we're now seeing from Leo, Rafe, Chad, and maybe even EJ. In other words, the disappearance itself could be the move, not the endgame. That would be very Salem. People are always treating human beings like chess pieces there, and it is awful and kind of diabolically fascinating. If that's the case, then the person behind it is probably less interested in Gwen specifically and more interested in what Gwen's absence causes. Leo spirals. Rafe investigates. Chad spreads information. Suspicions fall on EJ. The town gets unglued. That kind of chain reaction could be exactly what the real player wants. And I'm betting the show wants us asking, who took Gwen? When the better question may be, who benefits from the search? And last but not least, I have to entertain the idea that Gwen's disappearance may tie into family legacy territory, especially because the week keeps circling back to EJ, Susan, Stefano comparisons, and Alemania. That combination is just too loaded to ignore. Family legacy stories are catnip for this show. They're dramatic, they're emotional, and they let characters project all their worst fears onto each other. Susan fearing EJ is becoming Stefano is not just a random comment. That is thematic. That tells me the show is thinking about inheritance, identity, corruption, and the fear of history repeating itself. So, I could see Gwen getting caught in the middle of a story that is really about the sins of one family infecting everybody around them. And if that's where this is headed, then EJ may not even be the villain in the cleanest sense. He could be the man everybody suspects because of his name, his habits, and his increasingly questionable choices, while somebody else exploits that suspicion for their own end. Honestly, that would be much more interesting than a basic EJ did it reveal. It would also explain why Susan's presence matters so much. She isn't just there to react. She is there to frame the emotional stakes. If she sees Stefano and EJ, then even innocent actions start looking sinister, and guilty actions look downright doomed. Now, separate from the Gwen mess, we absolutely need to talk about Kristen and Lexie, because that storyline sounds like a disaster in motion. So, Kristen and Lexie putting their escape plan in motion already had me raising an eyebrow because escape plans in Salem are built on ego. Everybody thinks they're cleverer than they are. And then Abe and Theo bust Lexie in a lie, and later they surprise her again, which tells me this plan is springing leaks all over the place. I mean, honestly, if you're trying to pull off an escape and Abe and Theo are already catching inconsistencies, then maybe go back to the